Yashodanandana Praja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Praja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira
All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to C.C. Guru and Guru. Reading from the Srimad-Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 17, Text 11 through 13. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. 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 Parvat-yuvacha Yam kim aduna loke Shasta danda dhara prabhu Asmat vidanam dushanam Nirlajanam cha viprakrit. Someone chant the verse.
Shri Parvatu Vacha
Shri Parvatu Vacha
Ayam Kema maduna loke Shasta Dandhadhara Prabhu Asma Vidhanam Dushtanam Nilachanam Shaviprakrit.
Ladies,
Shri Bhagavatam
Shri Bhagavatam
Ayam Kim Aduna Loke
Ayam Kim Aduna Loke Shasta Dandhara Prabhu Asma Vidhanam Dushtanam Nirvajanam Shavipakrit.
Sri Parvati Uvacha.
Shri Parvati Uvacha.
The goddess Parvati said,
The goddess Parvati said,
Ayam, this, Kim, whether, Aduna, now, Loke, in the world, Shasta, the supreme controller, Dandadara, the carrier of the rod of punishment, Prabhu, the master, Asmat Vidhanam, of persons like us, Dushtanam, criminals, Nirlajanam, who have no blame, Cha, and Viprakrit, the restrainer. Translation: the goddess Parvati said, alas, has this upstart now received a post from which to punish shameless persons like us? Has he been appointed ruler, carrier of the rod of punishment? Is he now the only master of everything? So there's no purport. I'll give my purport. Pretty sarcastic. Next verse. Alas, Lord Brahma, who has taken his birth from the lotus flower, does not know the principles of religion, nor do the great saints like Bhrigu and Narada, nor the four Kumaras headed by Sanat Kumar. Manu and Kapila have also forgotten the religious principles. I suppose it to be because of this that they have not tried to stop Lord Shiva from behaving improperly. They also know purport. Purport, hell has no fury like a woman's scorn. Next verse. This Chitraketu is the lowest of Kshatriyas, for he has impudently overridden Brahma and the other demigods by insulting Lord Shiva, upon whose lotus feet they always meditate. Lord Shiva is personified religion and the spiritual master of the entire world, and therefore Chitraketu must be punished. Purport. All the members of the assembly were exalted Brahmanas and self-realized souls, but they did not say anything about the conduct of Lord Shiva, who was embracing the goddess Parvati on his lap. Chitraketu nonetheless criticized Lord Shiva, and therefore the opinion of Parvati was that he should be punished. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chaksur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manovistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Sayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svavadantikam Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vaevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasade Gaur Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Okay, I guess this is an explanation or prelude to the story of Vritrasura, how a great soul like Chitraketu took birth as a demon. And we see here there's some interaction in an assembly, and that's what happens when people get together. Even there's one phrase, it's really interesting, I heard this from Pradyumna, of one way we advance in spiritual life is sadhu sarg. Have you heard that phrase? Sadhu sarg. Sarga means friction. Friction with a sadhu. Of course, what's the friction with the sadhu? The sadhu represents the truth, and often we don't. So there may be some tension there. But here's an assembly, and Chitraketu, he has a particular conduct towards Lord Shiva, and then Parvati has a particular conduct towards Chitraketu. Lord Shiva also has a particular conduct with Chitraketu, as do all the assemblies of the great Vaishnavas. So then the question comes, and I think a lot of the Bhagavatam's about that, and it's so important, what is the proper conduct and what is the improper conduct? And there's consequences for each. And it's important to know it. Because there's good consequences from the proper conduct, and there's bad consequences for the improper conduct. Within bhakti, especially within bhakti. I'll give you a really amazing example of the benefits of good conduct. There's a verse in the Bhagavatam, Dharmasya yapa vargasya nartasto yapa kopate, that dharma is meant for liberation. And in a commentary by Jiva Goswami on this verse, he says, how is dharma? And what is dharma? Dharma means it's the science of behavior. We have a myriad of choices to make at every moment. And what is the right choice? And sometimes the right choice is attachment, sometimes the right choice is detachment, sometimes the right choice is tolerance, sometimes the right choice is anger. It's a myriad of choices. So dharma is the science of the correct choice. And the correct choice is the choice that will bring you closer to God and open your heart to God. But Jiva Goswami's comment is so interesting. He says, how is dharma meant for liberation? Because if you know the culture and you behave properly, then when a Vaishnav sadhu comes to your house, you'll relate properly with him, and therefore you'll advance in spiritual life. That's how dharma. That's a Vaishnava perspective. The whole Varnashram system almost comes down to that. The moment that you meet the sadhu and you behave properly, it opens the doors. Mahat sevam dwaras ahurva muktam. Seva, proper behavior to the Vaishnava opens the doors to liberation. So that's the proper behavior. And there's an etiquette, and we should know the etiquette, because I heard this, I read this one really good definition of culture. It said that what culture is the organization of your environment to facilitate communication, learning, and love. That's what culture is. If you have the right culture, then you can take advantage of proper Vaishnavas and learn things, rather than always being on the mental plane, you know, making your own judgment. Should I be? But there's a culture, and you yourself will know how to disseminate knowledge with the proper culture. And you'll be able to experience the nourishment of love with the proper culture. And you will be understood with the proper culture. In your mind, think of a person who you considered very cultured. You'll see these three things. They know how to relate to people, they know how to communicate to people, and they know how to learn from people. So it's so important to understand these various interactions, and we have a disadvantage here. We have advantages being in the West, and we have disadvantages being in the West, and the disadvantage being in the West is we don't know the culture. And therefore it's a little difficult sometimes for us to create the proper environment for people to be nourished and advance in spiritual life to their full potential. It's a very, very beautiful thing when you see a cultured person and how they behave and how they relate with others. Who knows the English translation for the Chaitanya Charitamrita that Prabhupada gave in his introduction to the CC? What?
Life force and immortality.
Almost, Adi, very good. The character of the life force in immortality. It's a template for how you behave. In fact, I started a book which I wrote a few chapters, which I hope that this year I could actually dedicate myself, which would be called Lessons from the CC. And taking out all the different examples of what is the proper behavior in different situations. For example, this is in the Panihati festival, where Sri Raghunath Das Goswami, it's such a beautiful scene. Raghunath Das Goswami is the son of the wealthiest man in West Bengal, and he wants to see Lord Chaitanya. And even he goes, Lord Chaitanya sends him back, which is also a very nice example. Why does Lord Chaitanya send him back? He wanted to renounce the world, come to Lord, he sent him back. And when he's back, and what did Lord Chaitanya say? Act like an ordinary pounds and shillings pence man. Act like an ordinary man. Why? And then what happens? He saves his uncle by his expert diplomacy. And what's the example that's set there? That once one's renunciation should be tested so it's not a farce. We shouldn't like push people, inspire them we push them back. And then what was the example was? Renunciates are not losers, because he was so expert. Showed how he was so expert. And then finally he was allowed to go because his father was very concerned he may run away. And then he goes to see Lord Chaitanya, and no, Lord Nityananda, because Lord Nityananda is nearby. He goes to see Lord Nityananda, and Lord Nityananda is sitting like effulgent. And Raghunath Das Goswami is so humble. He's so shy, he's in the distance. He's in the distance, and then people say, there's Raghunath Das Goswami. Because, I mean, he's the son of not only the richest man in West Bengal, but he bought from the Muslim rulers, basically speaking, he bought a whole district and bribed them so that the Vaishnavas could live there in peace. So he was very famous. There's Raghunath. But he's hiding in the distance. And then Lord Nityananda says, oh, there's Raghunath. He's hiding in the distance. He's a thief. Bring him over here, I'll punish him. And why did he call him a thief? Because he was trying to go to God directly and not through Guru. Lord Nityananda is Guru. He was trying to go to Lord Chaitanya directly and not through Guru. Therefore, you're a thief. You're trying to take God. God is the property of his devotees. That's where the whole Leela of Lord Chaitanya. Look, God had to get himself from the devotees. So it's such an interesting thing. And then he punishes him. And what was the punishment? Feed all the Vaishnavas. You want to remove all the obstacles to your spiritual life? Feed all the Vaishnavas. And then a very interesting thing, just subtle cultural points that are there. Then they're feeding all the Vaishnavas flat rice. And there's a platform where the senior devotees are sitting. But it's not just the senior devotees, it's Swajatiya and Bara Bara Lok. Swajatiya means the intimate devotees, and Bara Bara Lok, the big people in society. That's also part of the etiquette. So it's nice yesterday, Professor Jack Hawley came. He's a very distinguished professor. I don't know if he's a Vaishnava or not, or what his personal thing is, but he's respected. That's part of the culture. I've seen that in India too. Bara Bara Lok. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. This may surprise you. This was told to me by Pradyumna. When King George V or the IV died, he put his picture on the front of the Harmonist magazine. He respected. He respected the king. He respected because he was managing nicely and he allowed the Vaishnavas to preach. But there's subtle points how you relate in society that keep open these channels so you can experience bhakti. And if you don't, it's basically just the right heart and without envy, and everything will come clear. But you know, one time after Prabhupada disappeared, there were a lot of people that had relationships with Prabhupada, and I was given the task, because I was part of the management there in ISKCON Vrindavan, I was given the task of inviting the senior Vaishnavas to come to Prabhupada's disappearance day. So I remember I went to one senior Vaishnava and I said, you know, please come, we'd like you to speak. He said, well, why? I said, because you knew Prabhupada. He said, I did not know Prabhupada. Prabhupada lived with him for like months. He said, I did not know Prabhupada. He said, just like if you're before the deities and you're talking to your friend, do you know Krishna? Do you know that's Krishna? If you come to the temple and you're talking with your friends and you're back, do you know Krishna? So he said, I didn't know Prabhupada. Meaning that I didn't really know who he was. So then I said, but why don't you share with us what you saw then that would indicate who Prabhupada had become? That's what I asked him. What did you see in Prabhupada's behavior? Even though you didn't know Prabhupada was Prabhupada, because you were dealing with him very familiar, you didn't realize his status. Then what did you see then? That would give you a hint on who would become. And what he said is very interesting. Well, he said two things. He said one thing, that Prabhupada was so bold. Prabhupada was so bold, and he described where there was one very famous mission in India that was so-called spreading Hinduism, but they ate chicken. So Prabhupada wrote a satire on them called the Murky Mission, the Chicken Mission. And then Prabhupada didn't like that. He saw that in the Gaudiya Math that the monks, they started, this is fact, they started fighting over the rooms when they got a big temple. So he wrote a satire on that. He was telling me this. And the name of the sannyasi who is the parody was named Bojan Vilas. The form of material enjoyment. So he said, I like that Prabhupada was so bold. And he said, and the other thing he said, that Prabhupada knew how to relate to others. And then he described how Prabhupada would deal with a child. And then he said when someone was equal, how Prabhupada could exchange affection and how respectful Prabhupada was to seniors. He said, I noticed his ability to relate the culture. So here we're seeing what to do and what not to do. And I think there's one principle, and again, it's interesting. I think, you know, sometimes you have advantages and disadvantages in your life. I think one thing that helped me in my spiritual life was growing up in India. You can imagine, I went there in 1976, didn't know really anything, but I got to observe people from Prabhupada's generation in Krishna consciousness and the character of people, especially how they would adhere to their word. That was such a big thing. If a person spoke something, he would die for the truth. I saw that. I worked with one person, and he made a vow 40, 50 years ago when his son left home out of a family dispute. I will not return home until my son returns home. I will not eat any grains, any spices, any sweet things, or this. And you know, I met him after 40 years. He was still, his vow. He was only eating milk, yogurt, fruit, and boiled vegetables for the rest of his life. The way people would make their vows, and the culture of the people, and how they would relate to others. I remember one thing also really, really struck me is somehow or other, this Vaishnava, there's a senior Vaishnava, and someone came to him and was afraid that other Vaishnavas were going to mistreat him and take away his position or something like that. And I just remembered when you hear something from someone who's practicing spiritual life strictly for 50, 60 years, immersed in that culture from the beginning of the century, before there was the facility so easily to offend people by the flick of a mouse, by the button. I can offend 10,000 people, and I can put it, and you see. And I remember what he said it was some kind of incident. He says, tell this other person who knows my friend. He said, when a Vaishnava begs forgiveness, all is forgotten. All is forgotten. I remember that struck my heart. I really tried to follow it. You know, not bring it up again, not meditate on the past. So this is all there in the teachings of Prabhupada, the Bhagavatam, the Chaitanya Charitamrita. You know, how I remember Bhakti True Swami gave a class on Vaishnava etiquette, and he described how respect goes upwards and affection goes down. Right? Affection. Affection, basically, teaching is affection. I remember when Tamal Krishna Maharaj went to the university, because he was trained as a devotee and trained by Prabhupada. When he went to the university, even though he was the guru, the acharya, the GBC, he had all these upadhis, all these designations. When he was learning in the university and he had to get his degree, he would carry his teacher's books. He wanted to learn from a teacher, and he was studying religion, and then his name was Lonnie Cleaver. He was a big professor. He would carry his books. The beauty of that type of culture. So, and I'll tell you another thing once that Tamal Krishna Maharaj told me, and I think it's really, really applicable to this and really applicable to our lives. One time somebody made a bad mistake, and then somehow or other he became very forlorn, by that situation. So I wanted to help the person because she had no money. So I called Tamal Krishna Maharaj. I said, look, I'd like to give this person a donation. Will you help? And he said, yes, sure, I'll help. I said, but do you know what he did? He did something really bad. Do you know what he did? And he said, yes. He said, but that's not the whole person. And that's Vaishnava culture. We tend to make faults as the whole person. And sometimes the fault is right, and sometimes it's just a configuration of our false ego has it contacts with someone else's false ego. So, mano rite dasati bhavato meti. It's the mental plane. But regardless, I remember another thing I read in one commentary that I think is really applicable to here when you see the proper conduct. The proper conduct is Lord Shiva towards Chitraketu. The proper conduct is all the great exalted persons that Parvati is mentioning, who are behaving in a different way. They're very liberal. There's Lord Brahma is there. I mean, she mentions so many people. Bhrigu Muni, Narada, four Kumaras, Manu, Kapila, all the Mahajans are there. The people, Mahajana Yena Katasa Panta, we follow the path of the Mahajans. So the Mahajans are there. How did they react? Did they jump all over Chitraketu for his minor mistake? Bury him for the rest of his life? Again, I saw a beautiful thing once. There was this elderly Indian man, he never got married. He never got married. And he was very generous, actually. And I was a friend of his. And he was a friend of, anyway, I don't want to say it that way, but he was a friend of Prabhupada. Because Prabhupada had people his own age. And he used to come and tell Prabhupada Hindi jokes. And then he used to tell me the jokes he told Prabhupada. Not many people would get this. Maybe Braj Mohan will laugh, maybe. It was about a sadhu who went to the spiritual world. He achieved all, and he was ready to go into Goloka Vrindavan. And then he asked if there was Lipton tea and Britannica biscuits. And then, you see, they laughed. And then he didn't go. So anyway, he went. And then somehow or other, he never got married. He was like a businessman. He lived in Vrindavan. And then somehow he had some affair with his maid, and the local people found out. There's so much politics in these villages, and they're ready to... And then his godbrothers came. He was in something called the Char Sampradaya. And they were just so, they were just so affectionate to him. And they explained to him, you're getting older. Now I think, why don't you just come to our ashram and live? There was affection. They didn't find that little fault and expand it. This is the person. And therefore I read in one commentary that was really interesting, where it said, and it's a very important thing, there's two sides to a Vaishnava: the ordinary dealings and the inspired side. We all have a culture, we all have a nature, we all have our desires, we all have and there's the inspired side. And as much as possible, you look at the inspired side, because that's what Krishna will see. the inspired side. And we see that in the Hare Krishna movement. It's a testament to that. That people have come not from generally high-class Brahmin families. You look at the beginning of the Hare Krishna movement in those films that were shown. You know, at the very beginning, you know, they show at 26th Avenue. This is who Prabhupada spread the Hare Krishna movement through. But you see the reciprocation for their service, for their heart. But everybody else is focusing on their faults. Krishna's focusing on their hearts. I remember one time I was in Dallas, Texas. I was serving there. And Satsvarup Maharaj was the GBC, and he came and he told the devotees, I just got chastised by Prabhupada. And he told the story. There was one person that he removed as temple president. But that person basically had brought Ambarish and Lekha Shravanti, you know, Walter Ruther's daughter, and the grandson of the Krishna consciousness, and Prabhupada told him, is not service rewarded? Is not service rewarded? The inspired side. Of course, you know, this is a short class and there's subtleties. People do make mistakes. There has to be discipline. There has to be, but get the point. Is not service rewarded? My good friend Gunagari Maharaj, you know, he's not, and Borijan Prabhu called me, actually, I don't know, like 11 o'clock at night. I guess he didn't get the time, and I just stayed up. And he called me, because he was the person that actually Mitsuba said, I have to get a message to him. He was my friend, and I called him. I was able to dictate it, and he was able to give it to Gunagari Maharaj. And he was so kind, he was communicating with me, because he knew I wanted to be there. And he told me, he spoke, and he said this point was so important that he spoke. The Gunagari Maharaj, you know, he was not free from faults externally. He had made his mistakes. And he had his nature also. But at the end, look where he wound up. So what did Krishna see? Krishna saw that heart. Krishna saw that inspired side. He saw the person who was dedicated to this Sankirtan movement, the person who preached Krishna consciousness, who tried his best. That's what Krishna saw. The inspired side of the Vaishnava. And that's what all these great personalities saw with Chitraketu. Not the mistake he made, and he did make a mistake. And what was Chitraketu's mistake? He saw the ordinary dealings and not the inspired side. And his was even a worse mistake, because this was an advanced devotee, and the ordinary dealings weren't just even if he wasn't advanced, you'd have to be careful not to see his inspired side and just criticize the ordinary dealings. But this was an exalted person. So therefore you can't even understand. It's very difficult to understand the ordinary dealings, because they're moving on a different platform. Even Arjuna, you want to criticize Arjuna for being in ignorance? His ignorance was the Bhagavad Gita. His expression of ignorance are verses that we quote in the Bhagavad Gita. So, this is so important. They did not say anything about the conduct of Lord Shiva. Chitraketu nevertheless criticized Lord Shiva. So this, I think, is a real point. Not that we can't, of course, there's constructive criticism and the things that go wrong, but keep that point in the equation. Okay, there's a few minutes. Jai, you have any thought on this? Question?
So many. In the assembly of Vaishnavas is global now, thanks to technology.
Yeah.
And because of that, it makes it very complicated to apply some of these higher principles in those global situations. people are looking for justice and retribution in different levels of Vaishnava. So it's very hard to apply some of these subtle points that you're mentioning.
I mean, because there's vox populi.
Yes, and
You got to be Solomon, right? With the wisdom, how to apply it. Yeah, I think one thing. Yeah, I mean, this is just the whole point. Therefore, leadership has to be so stellar that they have authority, and therefore they can take decisions that may not be popular, but are right. Otherwise, there is a factor of vox populi and what people think. Vox populi means that decisions get voted by who screams the loudest and not what the principle is. So these factors are, and then you have an institution, the institution has to be protected. There's complexity. So I think what we do is we start with the principle and then see the applications. You're saying, well, how do you apply it here? It's very difficult. And therefore, what I say is, it takes, John F. Kennedy, one of the presidents, he wrote a book called Profiles in Courage. And the whole thing was about people who took stands that were not popular. And I just say, that's what I like about you. I rate the march. The truth, the whole truth, nothing but the whole truth. Okay.